Hello and welcome to another tutorial video. This is going to be a bit of an update to the SpaceX IPO from the previous video on this channel, or as I call it here, the aftermath of the dumbest market ever. Now, I rarely publish follow-up articles or videos, but I think it's fair to say the past few days since the SpaceX IPO on Friday have been quite eventful. We got dozens of really good comments and questions about the SpaceX valuation when it was originally published, and so I also want to go through some of those and answer at least a few of them here. I will discuss the IPO performance and also the Google deal that was announced a few days before the IPO, the Cursor deal that was just announced today. I'm recording this Tuesday night. I'll discuss a few other valuations, including Damodaran's and also the Morningstar valuation, and go through my process for picking apart and valuing SpaceX, since a few people asked about that. Also, I am going to value OpenAI or Anthropic once their official S1s are released. SpaceX and these case studies will eventually be in our VC course, probably sometime later this year as well. And these will be more of a step-by-step walkthrough or breakdown of everything rather than just simple summary overviews. You can get the written version of this article and links to all the sources and the different data that I'm going to cite below, mergersandinquisitions.com/SpaceX-IPO. I will also pin this as the first comment in the section below this video. So I'm going to discuss a lot of different topics here, and so I'll provide these timestamps up front so you can skip around and jump to whatever interests you. I'll start with an IPO update, talk about the Google and Cursor deals and how they affect the valuation. Then I'll talk about some of the other valuations that have been published. I'll go through my own modeling process, including where I started and how I thought about Starlink. I will talk a little bit about the other segments and why I set them up a little bit differently. Then, since I got questions about this, I will discuss AI usage in financial modeling, what I use for this valuation and what I recommend, and then I'll close with some one-year predictions and a quick comparison to Uber back in 2019, which we also valued in this channel. As I record this, SpaceX is up to over $200 per share, putting it at over 2.5 trillion, and frankly, I'm mostly just surprised that it's not closer to 5 trillion by this point, as I predicted in that first valuation video. Now, it could potentially turn into more of a volatility stock like Tesla, where it just bounces up and down a lot within a pretty wide range. In terms of the valuation metrics, I think the stock chart and also just some quick metrics from Capital IQ really tell the picture. At this point, SpaceX is trading at over 131 times its trailing revenue, and even on a forward basis, over 74 times forward revenue, around 40 times 2-year forward revenue. Needless to say, these metrics are ridiculous, and so the company is even more ridiculously overvalued right now. A few days before the IPO, the company announced this Google compute deal where they would rent their compute capacity to Google for about $900 million per month or something in that range. And I've estimated this at about a $50 billion valuation increase. How I'm getting to that number is that if we go over to the AI tab in my original model here, and we're very optimistic and we assume that they can just do this and earn a whole lot of extra money from this without actually impacting their AI solutions and infrastructure revenue. If we go in and we change the unused compute licensing rate to something like $30 so that they get around an extra 5 billion this year, and then maybe the year after this I'll change it to 35 billion, so we assume they build on the Google and Anthropic deals and get even more, and then it continues in a steady state after that and eventually reaches about 121 billion. If you go back and check the AI valuation after doing all that, so it does go up by a fair amount. The exact range depends a little bit on your assumptions, but I've estimated it at around 50 billion here. And that comes from the fact that if you actually extend this all the way through until the end, you probably get higher numbers. So it does make some impact, but we're still talking about a company that is mispriced by at least $1 to $2 trillion, so I don't know if it really changes things all that much. As far as the Cursor deal, they just announced this acquisition of Cursor today, and I have my estimate here that if we assume that the AI revenue as a result of this reaches 200 billion by year 20, so about double what I assumed in the optimistic case here, that implies that the valuation could be up by around 50 billion. It goes up by more than this, but you also have to subtract the 60 billion that they're spending to acquire Cursor in the first place. And if you do that, the net amount is somewhere in this range. So the bottom line is that these changes do positively impact the valuation, but we don't know that much about the full margins on them or the cash flow profiles. I also got some questions about other valuations, so I created this table showing how our version differs from Damodaran's and also the Morningstar valuation. You can find these pretty easily if you do a quick search, but I will link to both these as well. Here's the Morningstar version, and then here's Damodaran's version. I also downloaded his Excel file and had a look at it and went through it. The main difference is that all of our valuations actually have margins after about 10 years, 2036, in about the same range. Interestingly, the reinvestment assumption, so CapEx minus D&A, is actually pretty similar in ours and Damodaran's. There is some difference, but it's pretty small next to everything else. If you look at Morningstar, they are much closer to our revenue, whereas Damodaran is about 2x our revenue estimate here. The other significant difference is that we start at higher discount rates in most of these segments, usually at around 14 to 15%, and make it decrease to 8 to 10% over time. Starlink, we start at a slightly lower level. Damodaran simply starts at an 8.37% discount rate and makes it fall to 8.25% over time. And then both of these other valuations also factor in expansion opportunities or moonshots from things like asteroid mining and moon bases and lunar tourism and orbital data centers and things like that. The bottom line is that we do get to the lowest valuation of all these. I put it in this 165 to 1.1 trillion range roughly. Damodaran has it more in the 1.2 to 1.3 trillion range, and then Morningstar has an even wider range than us, about 380 billion to 1.9 trillion, although they peg the actual value at around 780 billion in theirs. So what do I think about all these other valuations? Overall, they're clearly more bullish than I am, though by different degrees. The Morningstar one is actually not that far off from sort of our middle case estimate here. I think my biggest issue is not whether they're bullish or bearish, but the fact that, for example, Damodaran doesn't go into detail on the unit economics or market size or share or anything like that. There are also no scenarios or sensitivities or different cases, which is really important for a company like this. So if you go and look at it, it's fine with the setup and all of that, but the problem is that if you go in and try to trace the revenue and where it's coming from, he does break it out by segment, but he sort of just has a final year number for each of the segments, but there's no real buildup to explain where it's coming from. There are a few notes in his written version of this that explain the market share and things like that, but we don't really see the progression, and so it's really hard to judge how credible these assumptions are based on that. With Morningstar, I do think they have a more defensible approach overall, because essentially what they do is something like us, where they break it into a couple of different scenarios, they probability weight them, and then they use that to determine the share price. So I do think that their approach here is definitely more defensible, but they also don't have much on the unit economics, the market data, and they don't tell us what discount rate they used for each segment, if they even varied it between the different segments. I also got some questions on the process that I use to pick apart a more complex company like this. So I thought I would take a few minutes and go through that. The specific question was that someone left a comment saying they felt overwhelmed and how everything was interconnected, and they were asking how I approached it to craft some type of narrative here. My first tip is, if you're new to modeling and valuation, don't pick this type of company because it's just too complicated. My second tip is, if you do pick this company, I would start with the smallest part that is still useful or the most important part. So here, for example, I looked at the financials for 5 seconds and I knew that Starlink would be the most important part to start with. So I just focused on that at first. I didn't worry about anything else. I just picked a very small piece. I knew also that Starlink would have the most data because it's an established company or a more established division, and there were a lot of comparable companies in this sector. Now, my first thought looking at this was to use the number of subscribers times the average revenue per user, but I quickly realized that this wouldn't work. And the specific issue is that if you take these numbers and multiply them, you simply do not end up with revenue numbers that are anywhere close to the total revenue for this segment. The reason this happens is because Starlink also has commercial revenue from selling their services to ship customers, to actual boats and then to actual planes that airlines use. And so you have to factor in both of these if you want to get a reasonable estimate. So that was the first thing I realized by looking at this. Now, the S1 had very limited information on this, but you can find some quotes online pretty easily for what Starlink charges boats and planes and airlines to use its services. So I'm going to pull up one example of what I found. This is actually on the Starlink site. They have these quotes here ranging from $200 up to $10,000 a month. And what I found is that the numbers for the fleet count and the customer count in that segment really only make sense if you assume something toward the top end of this range for the average. So that's sort of what I did here. I went back in and said, okay, let's say it's close to $10,000 per unit per month. what does that imply? And that gave us ship customers of around 25 to 35,000, which seemed pretty reasonable because by most estimates, there are about 100 to 150,000 ships worldwide, at least in the historical period. So that was my overall thought process here. Now, the other thing you have to be careful about is with a high growth company like this, no market or market share can grow at a high rate forever. We know that the number of rural households that Starlink can potentially sell to is not going to grow at a very fast rate. We're talking 1, 2, 3% growth per year. So that part is set. What's less clear though is the market penetration, because this has been going up a lot, 0.6% to 1.1% to 2.2%. So in some years it appears to be doubling. But of course, this is not going to last forever. You can't just assume this is going to keep doubling every year, because by the time you get to year 10 or year 20, you're going to end up with a ridiculous number. So my approach when I got to this part was to think about the comparable public companies in the telecom sector and to look at the type of market penetration they achieved. So I have a few examples here for Airtel, MTN, América Móvil, T-Mobile, and generally speaking, the market penetrations here were in the 20% to 50% range. That led me to say, okay, perhaps in these cases, the final year market penetration should be somewhere in that range for Starlink as well. So I went back to the control tab, I relinked the model a bit and set it up a bit differently. And I said, okay, across the cases, let's have the market penetration ranging from 20% to 40%. I changed it a little bit for the commercial segment and made it go from 40% to 80% because that's already more highly penetrated than the individual consumer segment. But that was the overall thought process here, using these comparable companies to benchmark what the long-term future for Starlink might look like. I used a similar process for the EBITDA margins and CapEx, and I made the control tab direct everything here and set up the main assumptions. Overall, with this type of valuation, we wanted to get to results that were reasonable, but not extreme. So something like 150 to 230 to 330 billion is pretty reasonable because it's just one specific segment. You don't want to see something that's 1 trillion to 2 trillion to 3 trillion, for example, because this is just one segment of a larger business. In general, we tend to focus on varying or sensitizing just one or two key assumptions because it's very difficult to calibrate everything if you try to go beyond that and sensitize 5 or 10 different assumptions for each division. So that's a little bit about Starlink. Now for the other segments, I didn't follow this exact process. For AI, I did feel that the market share and market sizing assumptions were quite important because there are some real physical constraints here that you don't necessarily see with traditional tech companies. Specifically, what I mean is that globally, there are only so many data centers being built and coming online each year. And Starlink can only capture so much of that market. No matter how well they execute, there are some real physical constraints and time constraints on how quickly they can do this. So I felt it was quite important to use a market size and market share approach there. For space, I didn't use that approach because they already essentially have that entire market. Also, external demand growth is actually pretty low in this segment, so I didn't really feel it was worthwhile here, so I just used simple percentage growth rates for this one. This segment is actually probably the least important of all the ones here, so I didn't go into a lot of detail in this particular division. I also want to address a few questions I got about how to use AI tools and whether you should try to do all your Excel work using these, and I'm just going to give my quick impressions and what I recommend. So I will confess that I used the premium version of Grok as a bit of an experiment. After all, I was valuing the company that makes it, so I felt it was appropriate. And I went through quite a few prompts. You can see my whole dialogue here. It's probably thousands or at least hundreds of messages, something like that. So I used it pretty extensively to pull all sorts of data, to cross-check numbers, to double-check things, to get new ideas. And my overall impression here is that I recommend using these tools to dig into companies, to go through filings, to retrieve information, to do research, to cross-check ideas and numbers, but I don't recommend using them to think for you. I know that a lot of people are fans of using these to generate their Excel files and models, and in my opinion, from what I've seen, most people who say that they use AI tools to do their Excel work and then they just check it afterward, they very rarely tend to actually check anything, and they very rarely tend to understand anything that they're doing. There are some exceptions for very experienced people doing this, but if you're just learning, I would really not recommend this. This is something to do once you already have a lot of experience and you really know what you're doing. Overall, I think Grok did save me some time here, and it did suggest a few ideas I hadn't thought of. It suggested some data sources I hadn't considered. So overall, I think it was positive, but I wouldn't really say it was a game changer. It's not as if it reduced the time required from 100 hours to 50 hours. It maybe saved a couple hours here and there and helped me get to some data more effectively than I would have been able to do on my own. Closing things out now, what are my one-year predictions for SpaceX? So far, I would say it's pretty much matched my expectations. Like I said last time, I think it's realistically worth maybe 200 to 500 billion. So the fact that it's pumping to more like 5 trillion as I record this is no surprise, because you just have to apply the magical Elon Musk multiple to the valuation to get what the stock market is currently pricing the company at. Where will it be in 1 to 2 years? I'm a little bit skeptical this is going to last. I don't necessarily think it's going to crash, but I do think we could see something like what has happened with Tesla in past years, where it just sort of fluctuates and varies a lot in a very wide range over time, but doesn't necessarily move that far up or even that far down. Back in 2019, I did a valuation of Uber, and back then I felt a little more comfortable saying, don't buy this company. I didn't exactly recommend shorting the stock, but the markets were slightly more rational back then. Also, Uber didn't have Elon Musk attached, so it was a little bit easier to assign some amount of rational behavior to investors there. I also got some questions about whether there's going to be a merger between Tesla and SpaceX, which would be insane, obviously, but because of the market we're currently in, I wouldn't be surprised. So if this happens, all I can say is buckle up, because if something like this is announced, it could almost be like the AOL Time Warner merger announced back in January 2000, which is pretty much the peak of the .com bubble. It could be something like that, although who knows? I've been wrong predicting the end of these bubbles before, so I'll probably be wrong again. That's pretty much it, so let's do a quick recap and summary now. With the IPO update, as expected, it has been increasing, although it's not up to 5 trillion yet, which is a little bit surprising to me. The Google and Cursor deals add something to the company's value, but I don't think that much, maybe 50, 100 billion, something in that range perhaps. With the other valuations, they were anywhere from modestly more bullish to me to a lot more bullish. My main issue is just that I don't really have enough data on what went into their assumptions to properly judge them. With my modeling process, I explained a little bit about the thought process and how I started with Starlink and how I went through a couple iterations of going down different paths to come up with a reasonable approach here. The other segments were similar in some ways, but it didn't necessarily always make sense to use a market share and market size approach, such as for the space division. With AI usage and modeling, you can certainly use it for research and finding information and digging into companies, but I wouldn't recommend having these tools do the whole thing for you, especially if you are trying to learn this the first time around by yourself. And then finally, for the one-year predictions and the Uber comparison, I don't really know if it's going to go the way of Uber. I think that it's more likely to just sort of fluctuate in a very wide range. I'm still very skeptical on the fundamental value of this company, but with Elon Musk in charge, all bets are off. Companies don't follow any type of rational thought process or reasoning, so who knows? That's about it for this lesson. Hopefully you gained a little bit more insight into SpaceX and what has been happening since the IPO on Friday last week.